this euphoria about John Rawlings. People saw a young man who came in and playing on the feelings of people. Whether it was sincere or not, we cannot tell. Probably on hindsight, we can say that it doesn't look sincere. But at that time, people were convinced that this is a guy who's, energetic young man. Some people describe a very handsome young man who is ready to offer leadership to this country. So when the time came for him to back out and Limann took over, he did not rest on his horse. He continued to become nostalgic about the period he was in power, wanting to get back. So it is his own interpretation that Dr. Hilla Limann had failed, but not that Ghanaians had really found Limann as having failed. He was bent on coming back, and he was doing everything possible. And unfortunately, at the time, like I was saying, the youth in the armed forces, the youth in the streets, were convinced that Rawlings was a man who could do it. So even when he was misbehaving, it was difficult to clamp down on him. You clamp down on Rawlings, whatever wrong happens on Rawlings, it would boomerang on the whole country. So he had to be tolerated like a toothache at the time. So that was why, because he was bent on changing the government, because he was bent on taking advantage of everybody, people could not really act on him decisively like they could have done if the circumstances were not the same. So he pursued his own selfish agenda. And one evening, Limann was invited to the Burma camp for annual Wasa of the Armed Forces. Around 11 o'clock, 11:30, he was told that, the Wasa was getting to an end, so he could leave. He left barely when he arrived home. He started staging the coup. And the whole place was turned upside down.
He was very disappointed and shocked. And some people have been saying all sorts of things that he himself has Rawlings to stage the coup. And who in his right senses will do that? He was very disappointed that what the country had set out to do had been so badly interrupted by such an incident.
When we talk of the coup, and I would venture to speculate that you're implying that he was probably aware of the coup. I would say that's ridiculous. I don't see it doesn't make sense that anyone will plot their own downfall. There was, in any discussion I had with him, there was never any indication that he had any foreknowledge of a coup. If anything at all, he detested the whole idea of a coup.
He said if the whole of Ghana Ghanaians should vote him into power, why then should he go and side with a few people to stay in power? Because there are other people who elected him to be president. He was elected by Ghanaians. And he wouldn't stoop so low to go and do such a thing.
At the coup, he was arrested and put up into a safe house at Kosovo. After about a month, when things had settled down, he was transferred to the BNI under Namfuri, the northerner, and Kwanson. He was there, I don't know for how long. Then he was freed, but then I had to go and sign bail for him. Myself and his friend, the Wallaman, we went and signed bail, and Limann was released. He was to stay with me in Tesano. By that time, I was working for the police. Kublenu, who was then the IGP, said, no, Limann couldn't stay with me since police were paying for the house in which I was staying. So overnight, I had to make arrangements for him to go and stay with another colleague of ours, Mr. Fokker, who was then in Nigeria. And Limann moved into Fokker's house. Now, I used to cook and take the food across the road to Limann. This went on for over a year until he moved into his own house in Teshinongwa. He had no car. The wife was not around. The children were then in Nigeria. So I had to look after him until he moved into his own house in Teshinongwa when the wife came back.
It wasn't easy at all. First of all, we, the family, we were all separated. And later, by God's grace, we came together. And as I told you, we left the castle penniless, without anything. So we have to start from the beginning again. Yes. It was hard. But by God's grace, we were able to pull through, and I was able to see to all the children had all their education.
We were never really brought up in a luxurious setting. It was never put in our heads that you were a privileged family. On the contrary, even in the castle, my parents were very strict. But then when we left the castle, this is something that I always wanted to be recorded in the history, that my mother became the sole breadwinner. My parents were not looked after. My father's assets were frozen, and therefore, in a sense, they were sort of, confined to the country. But at the same time, nobody bothered to find out how was he, living, how was he taking care of his family. It was trite that he was not working. It was trite that he didn't have a source of income. It was trite that his assets were even frozen. So he lived for another 20 years. The question is, how did he survive? He survived because God gave him a good wife, a godly woman, who decided to rise up to the occasion. And my mother did not work really, she was an Electric Extension officer. But after the coup, she started doing tie and dye. She had been doing it before, she took it up again. And I really wanted on record that this is how we were brought up. We were not brought up on state funds. We were not brought up because at the time we left the castle, my older sister, she had left the country and come back. She was an adult, but of the younger ones, all of us were pretty young. None of us had finished secondary school. Many of us, I was in midstream primary school. Nobody knows what we went through. Some of us had to be distributed among friends. We had to grow up with family friends who helped us. When we came back as a family in 1984, we saw how hard my mother struggled, to fend for us in tie and dye. And I'm proud to say that we helped her. In fact, we were her labor force. At the time, we didn't like it, but now looking back, I'm proud to say that I helped my mother to tie and dye, which took us to school. And for many other kids in other jurisdictions, that in itself can traumatize you, because as a lawyer now, studying about the interest of the child, there's what we call the best interest of the child principle. And if a couple are getting divorced, invariably, the court would give the children to the parent who is able to maintain the lifestyle the child is used to. We were not used to a luxurious lifestyle, but at least we were used to a minimum, set of comfort and dignity. And yet we saw how my parents struggled. We saw that paying for school fees was not an easy option. I would hasten to add that there were very good sympathizers. My mom said there were few, but there were who were loyal, who assisted along the way. There were some benevolent friends, and God bless them for the fact that they stuck with us. But generally, many of our friends who meant well were afraid to associate with us because they feared that they would be victimized, And so we were sort of, in a sense, to a large extent, ostracized. And, my parents really, really struggled to bring us up. My mother was virtually a single parent us until the time my dad died. And therefore, if you recall, even after he died, there was a lot of debate in the media. Because the media, some people said he should be given a state burial. Some people said he should be given an ordinary person's burial. And the reason was this, if you guys were old enough to remember, if you read the reportage, people said, but we saw Limann. Everybody knew that by the time he died, he had a pickup That pickup was so old and rickety. Many times it will break down in town, and everybody was seeing this at least a month or two before he died. The pickup will break up and people will push the pickup. This was not good for a former president. People saw all this. And so when he died, it wasn't even the family. There was such a hue and cry from the nation that it doesn't make sense. Why would you want to give Limann a state burial? When we saw that he was abandoned virtually all his life, why now a state burial? And for us as a family, it was an easy choice to make. The fact that he was buried in the Independence Square makes people think that, they had the funeral there, that it was a state burial, but it wasn't, because any Ghanaian can go there, and it was for some of these reasons that on grounds of principle, the family decided that let us have the humble funeral that depicted the humble life that he had. But I think that it should be on record that all those years, 20 years, nobody took care of him. He never worked. It was my mom who became the sole breadwinner. But the important thing is that in all of this man never showed any bitterness. And one of the other recollections I had was that anybody who walked through our doors, because we had an open door policy, he never believed in protocol. Not only would they come and take his time, but everybody who walked in, he would say, bring them something to eat. Even in the fact that we didn't have, he still felt like a father of the nation. Anybody who walked in here, if you walked out without having something to eat, it was just because you didn't want to eat or something to drink. Even in his, in that state of not having,